Welcome back to Liberty on the Rocks. I'm your host, William Gaston, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Thomas Kilroy. Tom?
Yeah, I figured we were going to do things a little bit differently today.
That's for sure.
With me opening this up. Brought a little Tennessee with me here in somewhere, USA. But, yeah, all the hair's gone.
Yep.
And so, we're going to dress it down a little bit.
Yep. Actually, I'm trying this new thing called sobriety.
Huh.
Sobriety. I think that's what it's called. So I'm drinking a little bit of coffee out of my favorite mug. Notice me, senpai.
Hand-etched and whatnot.
Indubitably, the greatest of drinking vessels, with the exception, of course, of our own whiskey tumblers. Don't take any substitute.
What are we doing today, man?
So today we're going to be talking about the differences between communism and Nazism, our two favorite isms to hate. But I want to dive in a little bit about why it's culturally acceptable to kind of hold up communism as this ideal, or socialism as this ideal, but Nazism, it's something that you throw around to label your enemies. So why is...
Yeah, that's interesting.
Why is one okay and one isn't, and, how did it become that way? So I want to explore that a little bit. So before we get there, though, we need to really outline exactly what both of these things are. So socialism, of course, the actual definition, not the more modern interpretation, if you will, is that industry is nationalized. So the government has partial or whole control over certain industries or all industry across the country. Nationalized industry, to put it simply.
Okay.
And then, of course, Nazism is socialism plus racism, in a sense. So, of course, the modern interpretation of socialism, like what Alexandria Obama-Cortez likes to throw around, or Bernie Sanders, is this idea that it's basically just a massive welfare state, which, we can attack that too. We'll address it. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, Nazism, we're going to get to that a little bit more in depth, but essentially the point that we're going to be making here is that Nazism is the exact same thing as socialism or communism. There's just more of an emphasis placed on race or ethnic identity and all this sort of thing. So, but to put it into a modern context, obviously we see every protest or pundit on TV or whatever, you have all of these left-wing people throwing out the term Nazi, far right-wing, extreme right-wing. So
it's very dismissive of whatever that person is talking about. Obviously, if the shoe fits, if they are what they are being accused of,
sure,
then that's fine.
But 9 times out of 10, it's hyperbolic, at least in the modern sense.
In terms of argument, I'm saying it's fine.
Of course.
If you're going to put a badge on somebody, if they are an actual Nazi, then
call them what they are. But the problem is that they conflate this term to be whatever they want it to be, instead of actually realizing historically and in the modern context what it actually is or what it actually means.
Sure.
And it's just, frankly, it's really irritating because they use this as a club to, as you said, just dismiss whatever opinions that person has because, well, if he's a Nazi, then you don't have to listen to him.
Yeah.
So it shuts down the conversation before the conversation can even happen, which is just, it's intellectually lazy, but it's also it's dangerous, because you're shutting the door on having a conversation, an exchange of opinions, an exchange of ideas. So we have to get away from that, first of all, in the modern context.
That reminds me of... I'm reading through 12 Rules for Life. I don't know what part it is. Whatever part that I'm at currently. But something that really struck me is along the lines of what you're saying right now is the way that he sees it in that argument is if you are looking at people around you or just knowledge in general and relating it back to yourself, and you truly believe that you can't learn anything beyond what you already know, he's saying that is evil, or that is like the beginnings of evil, because the whole thing from the beginning to where I am now is just out of order becomes chaos and vice versa. Too much of a good thing can go sour.
So in that context, he's talking about kind of the same thing that Hayek talks about in The Fatal Conceit. You know, this idea that, well, I know so much, or I am so smart that I get to decide what is best for you because you, poor thing, bless your heart, as we say down here.
Yeah.
You just don't know better, but I do. So let me take care of this for you. It
is the same. I don't know if Hayek goes into that being someone who has ill will or motivations for just absolute the travesties and things that we're going to talk about.
Right.
About existing, and we have before, existing communist regimes, and certainly Nazism. So I don't. What is your take on how grave the issues are that Hayek's talking about?
Well, I mean, I think he's using that as a jumping off point to explain why totalitarian regimes like socialism or communism or Nazism are so easy to latch onto. Like, there's a part of the human mind, or even the human spirit, that says that's appealing to me. So I think a large portion of that is just pride. You know, the idea that, well, I am prideful enough, I am arrogant enough to believe that I am so smart, and I am so much smarter than you, that I can tell you what to do, and that's morally acceptable. So we see that.
That's so interesting because, I mean, I'm going to throw out a blanket statement, but it seems like people that vote for authoritarian views, they're okay with believing that for their elected official.
Yeah, well, and that's
so weird.
That's a cultural turn that we've been going through. Well, I mean, I think humanity's always been that way. I mean, even when you look at in ancient times, you know, the emperor of Persia or Babylon or whatever was seen as God, you know, or in the medieval times, there would be he has divine right. You know, the king has divine right. So at least
that was the whole cause of the French Revolution,
right? Was
the divine right of kings and
overthrowing that entire idea, and then Rousseau got thrown in there and kind of jacked it all up. But anyway, so. The point being that people are always looking to a higher power, either for direct control over their lives or justifying someone else directly controlling their lives. They want something to hold on to. And so the whole idea of the foundation of America was that we're not doing that anymore. So you as an individual have ultimate sovereignty over your own life. But I think because just the way humans are, human nature, we're leaning towards more authoritarian government again because of the exact same principle behind the divine right of kings, or believing that, you know, our king or emperor was God. There's just something in the human spirit that makes that appealing, or makes us want to believe that.
This isn't something I've ever expressed per se, but the way that I see language police and everything that goes along with that group, I think they're the new modern, what's the word?
Inquisition?
Well, there's that, but they're the new legalists.
Oh, sure.
They're the new version
Puritans.
of pure. Yes.
Yeah. Well, Gavin McInnes talks about this a lot.
Okay.
Yes. So exact same thing. It's the same. Excuse me. Yeah. The same symptoms to the same disease. There's a better way to put that, but
yeah.
Excuse me. Different symptoms to the same disease, I should say. So they want authority. It's just their driving force is different, or exactly what form they want that to take is different. But it's coming from the same place.
Yeah, it's like I forget who it was, but it was someone at the Daily Wire. I was listening, downloaded the podcast and was walking around and was listening to it, and it was essentially like how did this writer at the New York Times put it that Stormy Daniels is a feminist hero?
Yeah.
She had an affair with Trump one time and wouldn't be quiet about it, and got paid money to be quiet about it, and then started to talk again, and then now she's a hero. But it's obviously just because she's opposing Trump,
right?
But to then shine a spotlight on some things that conservatives believe, actual Puritan, legalistic people, and say, "Oh, well, that's prudish." But yet, with the fall of modern comedy, if we want to go back to, not even 20 years ago, the different things that are being said on a comedic stage, people would recoil. And the only reason that they think it's fine now is because they're able to look at that person and then, are they still in our camp from when they recorded that till now? Yes, they are. Well, then, we're still good.
All is forgiven. Yeah. Don't even bring it up.
Yeah. It's crazy.
So I want to get back around to the whole Nazi thing. Okay, sure. So historically, we're talking about the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Okay, so you got National Socialist German workers. This whole idea of organized labor is a very socialist, communist idea. So make no mistake, these were National Socialists. Of course, the difference being, so let's take the USSR and Nazi Germany, for example. So when Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto and started this whole movement, he saw it as an international workers' revolution. So, he ends the Communist Manifesto with workers of the world unite.
Right.
So the whole idea was that this wasn't supposed to be contained or focused on one individual country.
And I guess by that, what you're saying in that tagline, it does transcend race.
Absolutely.
And creed. Well, there is no creed. There's just the one creed of Marxism.
Correct.
Okay.
So even with the USSR, the idea was that this was a uniting of the Soviet Socialist republics. So think of it kind of like the United States. So it wasn't just Russia gobbling up other countries, although for all intents and purposes it was. But at least the official standpoint was that, these other countries have joined the revolution, and we're all going to form this giant block of communism. But they still have national sovereignty. They've just chosen to join with us, quote unquote.
Yeah, it's almost democratically they chose.
Sure. So, never mind the Red Army on their border, comrade. So, basically, I'm trying to point out the difference, emphasize the difference between international socialism or Marxism and national socialism. And besides being contained in a border, within a border, the economic policy is exactly the same.
Okay. So it just doesn't play well with others.
Basically, yes. So instead of saying we're working for the workers of the world, they're saying we're working for the workers of Germany or whatever. Obviously, Germany is the example here. So,
had it sprung up somewhere else? Well, Mussolini was first, right? He was the blueprint. The ideas, not so much the execution.
Sort of.
Wink, wink.
Right. That was dark. So Mussolini is an interesting character because he started out as a communist or a socialist, and then he was like, none of that's going to work. We can't do this international thing. Let's go national. And that's when he became more of a fascist. So if Mussolini had put as much emphasis on race or ethnicity as Hitler had done, then Mussolini would have been seen as another Hitler instead of kind of the clown of the Axis powers. You know, he just couldn't get anything right, the poor guy. So, but that's really it. You know, they followed the exact same economic model. So, in fact, a lot of people, something that Hayek points out in The Road to Serfdom, he talks about before we were at war with Nazi Germany, a lot of you same people that are crying out for us to, you know, totally wipe Germany off the map and all these other things, you were praising the building of the Autobahn or, you know, this rise of Germany as an economic power in Europe, using socialism as an economic model to do it. You were praising all of the things that they were doing, but now that we're at war with them, you want us to totally destroy them.
Oh, Britain, same thing.
Well, he was in Britain when he wrote it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's who he's making fun of, who he's mocking in this case. And then, of course, as soon as the war was over, they started crying for a lot of the same policies that Nazi Germany had.
So you want to know something funny? I was watching Cars of the People. It's James May from British Top Gear and now the Grand Tour. He has this series, and there's one thing that contributed to the rise of, well, the success, the ultimate success of the Nazi Party. Do you know what it is?
No.
The Volkswagen Beetle.
Okay, explain.
Okay.
Expound on this.
So, I'm just going to tell everyone what it is, because you still need to watch it. It's awesome. But, essentially, Adolf decided that he wanted people to have a vehicle. They were still expensive. You know, cars in Europe there wasn't like a streamlined thing that people wanted to be a part of. Like, so he kind of started a movement with this thing, and he decided that it needed to be the shape of a beetle. So he determined the shape, which I didn't realize.
I didn't know that either.
And it was designed by Ferdinand Porsche, the other famous German automotive maker at the time. The first one that they made was actually, so if you looked at it, oh, it's a VW Beetle. No, it was technically a Porsche.
Wow.
Which I thought was interesting. So basically what he did was when we were growing up, banks would give us these pamphlets, like bifold pieces of paper that had slots in it. You'd put quarters in it, and after a certain amount of time, you had $10 or whatever, right? Yeah. So he did that with marks, and it was your booklet to help you save to buy a Volkswagen Beetle. And so people were saving up. There was this retreat center somewhere. Maybe it was probably in Germany. It doesn't matter. It was never used. It was set up, and it was like, oh yeah, you can save your money, you can save for your Beetle, and you can drive to this retreat center. It was all sham. Just like all the buildings on the southern border of North Korea. Yeah, yep. So people save up, and they put their marks together, they turn them in, and he projected a certain amount of time to where everyone was going to do it. And he was like, you know what? Things are bad on all of our borders. We need to raise the military. Right. We need to, go to war with everyone else. And it was just a Ponzi scheme. So the Volkswagen Beetle funded the Nazi military empire.
Wow. That's really intense. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I totally lost my train of thought there. Okay, so basically the intellectuals, the economists and the political philosophers in much of the rest of Western civilization at the time were praising all of these things that Hitler did. He was using the exact same economic model, but it was focused around the country, nationalism, if you will. Right. And I understand that's kind of a dirty word now too, but from a purely intellectual point of view, in the strictest sense, that's what he was basing it on, was this idea of patriotism. You're doing it for Germany and for the German people, for the Volks, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how he drummed up all of this support for his movement, much in the same way that communism, drumming up support for communism is all based around, workers of the world unite, et cetera, et cetera. But let's take it a step down and look at its slightly less authoritarian cousin, socialism. So in the same way that you're talking about from a nationalist perspective, well, we're doing it for the German people. In the same way, this is one of the ways that socialism becomes most appealing in the modern context, is because people say, well, it'll help so many people, or it'll help the poor. Don't you care about the poor? Well, if you don't want socialism, then you must not care about all of those people going without health care. You know, it's a quick shot to make you look like a bad person, you know, to attack your credibility. So for no other reason, you're going to be like, oh, well, I don't hate the poor. I want to help them. I guess, yeah, we'll just let the government do it. But it's the exact same thing. There's no difference between the two.
Yeah. So, with what you're saying, I guess just break down what's the difference between a single nation state, like, for instance, Obama Cortez and her ilk are wanting to make the U.S. a socialist economy and government structure. How is that not nationalized?
It is nationalized.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not any different.
No, it's
just
not any different
racist
at all. Correct. So, which brings me back to my next point that I wanted to address here. A lot of people talk about how, specifically socialist advocates and actual communist sympathizers, tankies, will say that, well, yeah, the National German Workers... National Socialist German Workers' Party weren't. That was just a name. You know, they used it because socialism was the cool thing at the time, but they weren't actually socialist. Or they'll say, well, you know, fascism or Nazism is a right-wing ideology. So this is something else that I want to dismiss just out of hand because of how ridiculous it is, the notion that it's right-wing.
Yeah, textbooks were telling us when we were going through economics classes that's the case. I mean, it's... Right. And then little did they know, you know, it's the whole... It bends.
The horseshoe, yeah. Well, even if a lot of people don't follow the horseshoe theory, the idea that it's a right-wing ideology, there's no historical basis for it at all. So again, to put it into a modern context, so the modern left wants Medicare for all. They want a large welfare state. They want gun control. They want a nationalized economy.
This still sounds like Germany in the 30s.
Man, you're stealing my thunder here.
I'm sorry.
And they're obsessed with identity. Okay, and I want to make that point very clear as well.
That's true.
Absolutely obsessed with identity. You know, they've got this whole hierarchy of victimhood and all of that kind of thing. So let's look at 1930s Germany. Take it away, Tom.
Yeah.
You know?
They want gun control.
Yeah.
Socialized health care.
Yeah.
Well, they had mandatory military service. That's kind of the difference, I suppose. If
you could find one, that would be it.
What's interesting, I wonder if healthcare is the new Volkswagen Beetle.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's going to be, we all need to just chip in and pay for it, and then, oh, wait, something came up that you guys didn't know about. We need to do this drastic measure.
Got to shift our focus. Yeah.
We'll see.
That's a really interesting takeaway there. I hadn't thought of that. But if you go point by point, if you're checking the blocks between the modern left and really just the modern platform of the DNC and the Third Reich, it's just boop boop boop, just same way all the way down. They had gun control. They had a massive welfare state. They had nationalized economy. They were socialists. They obviously obsessed with identity. And not just against people that they didn't like. It wasn't just about, getting rid of the Jews, the gypsies. They focused on homosexuals, the mentally handicapped, all these different things. But then on the flip side of that, they also put certain people on a pedestal as well. If you're blonde-haired, blue-eyed, you have this IQ. You can trace your family back X number of generations to show that you're of pure heritage.
Just falsify your record.
Or just falsify your records.
Which I would have to do because,
You are you're a child of Abraham. But
what's that church in California? Because we both busted out laughing. The guy was like, oh, Jesus was a Palestinian Jew who's a person of color. And I was like, I am now a person of color.
You are now a person of color. You are you are higher up on the victimhood hierarchy than I am. So congratulations,
That's
Tom.
absolutely ridiculous.
So in the same way, they were obsessed with identity, both to pick out who to push to the side and who to prop up or put on a pedestal.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing, which says something interesting. And I don't know...
It's so similar, too.
I don't know what kind of conclusions we could draw from this, but I think it's...
What's that?
It's so similar that it might even say something about humankind, human nature. Like, why do we draw these kinds of patterns?
Yeah, you said before, we can't seem to break out of a certain kind of mold.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whatever it is. Given enough time,
mm-hmm.
resources, people,
mm-hmm.
we keep going back to these same ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, the whole, it's the current year.
Right.
From a macro level, really doesn't matter because it's all the same.
Right. I mean, it's what goes around comes around, and whatever other idiom happens to fit.
Yeah.
But even when you look at... So abortion is another interesting thing that I actually haven't addressed before in these conversations.
Well, we've both seen 300.
Right.
I mean, they hold up the babies, and if they were imperfect, they threw them away.
I mean, specifically with Nazi Germany. So if your child was mentally ill or somehow had a defect, a birth defect, just get rid of it. It's a burden on society. Or especially if you were already someone that was... undesirable, quote unquote, mm-hmm. then obviously your pregnancy will be terminated by force. They were big fans of that. They were big fans of using abortion as a form of ethnic cleansing. In the same way that, is it Iceland? Yeah,
it's modern Scandinavia
mm-hmm.
or Iceland where they said they eradicated downs,
which is a really weird.
And I was like, oh wow, what did they? How did? That's an interesting word,
right?
How did? Oh,
it's not polio.
It's abortion.
Yeah,
That's how they quote eradicated Down syndrome,
which implies that it's not going to come up ever again. No, it's still going to come up. You just have to keep killing your babies that have it because you decided that that's a burden on society. In the same way that the Nazis decided that. This was a burden on society, to have these people, the children of undesirables, or whatever the case
mm-hmm.
might have been. So it just really it burns me up just thinking about that crap. Anyway, okay, so we've drawn all of these similarities, or I mean, really just straight copies between the modern left and Nazism. Let's talk about a lot of the same things that were happening in communist countries or socialist countries at the time. So in the modern context, you have countries like Scandinavia, or Scandinavian countries.
Right.
Where countries like Scandinavia...
What's a LOPO?
Yeah, that's going to be in the next Bernie Sanders speech. Countries like Scandinavia. I mean, he might as well. He keeps using them as really bad examples. But anyway.
Yeah, please stop talking about us. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the Danish Prime Minister comes out and says, please, we don't practice a socialist economy, or a democratic socialist economy, or a market economy. Anyway.
Yeah, because it was failing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was failing, and even at the time when it wasn't as obviously falling under or collapsing under its own weight, it was still technically a market economy. They just had stupidly high taxes.
Yeah.
And now it's collapsing under its own weight, so I mean, we went either way. But the point being, all of these countries that democratic socialists like to hold up as being the prime example of these sorts of things practice a lot of the exact same things that the Nazis did. Abortion being a prime example. Mm-hmm. So really the only thing we can separate between the two is I don't think Sweden or Norway are setting up concentration camps. So that's one for them, I guess. But other than that, as far as your economic and your domestic policy, it's extremely similar.
Yeah.
And then when you look at communist countries, many of the same things. Obviously, the economic system is very similar. You have gun control. You have abortion. You have this sort of free... Well, even in the USSR, after the Bolsheviks came to power and they start putting in all of these new policies, they said their goal was to create a new Soviet man and a new Soviet woman. again, you have this sort of almost like you're rising above the normal human being.
How homogeneous did they make their society? Because they had civil wars.
Oh, of course. And even in the cultural context. So the whole idea of the Bolshevik Revolution was that they're going to create a perfect system where everyone is equal and all of this sort of thing. Even, of course, at the time, women didn't have very many rights anywhere in the world. So that was one of the things that they pointed to as being revolutionary. Well, women have the right to divorce, women have the right to vote. We're going to give women all of these things, ethnic minorities all of these things. But in practice, that didn't really happen, at least as widespread as they would have liked people to have thought at the time. The same way with ethnic issues. So ethnic minorities in the USSR were absolutely looked down upon by the ethnically Russian people.
I figured they would be.
So it was Russians, Slavs, and then non-Slavs. So, if you are ethnically...
Which is ironic, because I guess during feudalism, Slav, the direct, I guess, definition, the origin of that is where we get the word slave.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so they were the serfs.
Mm-hmm.
They were the people that propped up the Russian nobility, which is all those outlying countries. So, of course, they're going to still harbor resentment. But the fact that they're slightly elevated above other people is interesting. So I guess people who are more ethnically from, like, the Orient area, they didn't fare as well. Is that what you're saying? Or what?
Exactly. So if you were more in Eastern Russia, so if you're along the coast, you've got a lot of Asiatic countries out there. So you're going to have Asians, whether you're ethnically Chinese or Japanese or, mixed, whatever the case might have been. Well, you're not really one of us, or you're not a real Russian, kind of thing. Yeah, but we're all comrades, right? Yeah, not really. So you've got the ethnic angle on that. At the same time, they're still splitting people up by income or by fiscal division, I suppose, for lack of a better term. So after the revolution first popped off and the Bolsheviks won, they put all of this new government in place. They're pushing it forward. And we've talked before about how they actually used capitalism to get their economy back on its feet and fully industrialized. Mm-hmm. So at the time, they needed the middle class or the middle upper class. They called them... I lost it. Anyway,
keep going.
So they had a specific...
And you're drinking coffee.
And I'm drinking coffee, man. They had a word for it. Not the kulaks. Anyway.
You're saying they're the middle class group?
Right.
Okay.
So this was the bourgeois, folks that we were supposed to overthrow, but now we need them. We need them to stick around for a little while, but they're going to get theirs. Don't you worry.
You want to know something that just popped into my head?
What's that?
So bourgeois people at that time, what was their perceived wealth? What did they have? What amenities did they have?
More than the serfs.
Right. Compare that to today. What the average American, what do they have related to those people? Is it better?
Oh.
Is it the same?
Massively. Well, I mean, you got to look at, in terms of international standard of living, Americans, the poorest American is in the top 1% in the world as far as standard of living is concerned.
Why are they trying to adopt?
Because it's greed. It all comes down to greed. It's envy, man. It's the exact same thing that they would accuse, the 1/10 of 1%. Oh yeah, those guys are just greedy bastards. They're hoarding wealth. Well, first of all, that's not how wealth works. But at the same time, they just want something that they don't have. They're not concerned with what they do have. They just see something else that they want. And if they can have somebody else take it and give it to them, then they're going to back that person. Or they're going to back that movement or whatever. But, so the Bolsheviks split up the country. They divided the country by your level of wealth as well, or your standard of living. So when it came time, they figured, well, we've got an industrialized economy now. Now's the time. Now we need to institute actual, like, pure Marxist-Leninism. So that's when they said, okay, yeah, all of you poor guys, go into that big house, drag the middle-class people out in the street and shoot them, and then just take all their crap. If you want to squat in there for a while, you can do whatever you want. And that was their way of sort of placating the poor that had originally backed their play during the revolution. So now they're like, okay, we're going to let you off the leash, get your bloodlust on, you know, and you're doing it all for the revolution, so it's cool, you know. So again, you have this parallel between dividing people based on what, you know, whether it's ethnicity or it's how much money you make or how successful you are. It all comes down to division. And again, this is something that runs parallel between socialists and communists, Nazis, and the modern left, just across the board. So again, why is it that it's culturally acceptable to talk about communism or even socialism, but not Nazism?
And your point earlier was it's purely based on widespread racism or not.
Right.
If that is part of your charter or not. Mm. So, wait a second. Does that mean that Hezbollah, if they were socialists, would be Nazis?
Yeah. I mean, if we're going to be ideologically consistent here, you know, if we're going to say, well, this is the standard, this is what makes you a Nazi, you know, then we would have to be like, yeah, those guys are basically Nazis. And they would actually be basically Nazis, which is hilarious. I hadn't thought of that before. So yeah, the racial component is really the only thing that separates them.
Wow.
But because that racial component isn't there, it's just, oh, it's a totally different system. Not even close. No, that's right wing and this is left wing. Okay, so let's assume that these people are right and they're on totally opposite ends of the political spectrum, whether it's in a straight line or a horseshoe or whatever. Let's just say
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Let's say they're on either end of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Now, in terms of authoritarianism versus libertarianism, they are both 100% totalitarian models. That cannot be argued.
So why even put it on the right? Is it just another case of history is written by the victor?
More or less. I think this is one of those things where, like what Saul Alinsky talks about in Rules for Radicals.
Right.
Well, if you repeat something over and over again, eventually it just becomes accepted fact. So I think in a lot of ways, I mean, there is even the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between the Soviet Union and the Nazis. You know, to explain that. So before Germany invaded Poland in 1939.
I do know this.
Yeah, well, yeah. So before Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the Russians, or the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, actually had a non-aggression treaty between the two of them, saying that there would be trade and cultural exchanges, and in addition to that, oh, by the way, we're going to carve up Poland between the two of us. So when Germany invaded on September 1st, 1939, from the west, the Russians came in from the east, and they carved up Poland like a turkey. But we don't talk about that in history class because the Russians were on our side.
Later,
yeah. So
I think, well, from what I understand, the only reason they did that is because there's maybe one nation before that has survived a military campaign of a war on two fronts.
Mm.
I think it was Alexander.
Yeah.
Out of Macedonia. I think that was it.
Yeah. Well, basically, I think the way that both leaders saw it, Stalin and Hitler, they both said, well, one of us is going to conquer all of Europe. It's just a question of which. So I think they were both eyeballing each other like, okay, once we're done with all the other countries, the two biggest kids on the block are going to fight.
Yeah.
But that was the start of them conquering the rest of Europe.
And I think Germany was starved for oil at one point because of U.S. UK coalition forces blowing stuff up.
Well, that, and we were also, that's when you get into a little
cut off a bunch of supply lines. And
so
it changed hands a lot.
America basically placed an embargo on Japan and Germany because of that, because we were allied with Britain, and so just straight out of the bottle, take it to the head. So that was part of it. That's actually one of the reasons why Japan attacked us at Pearl Harbor, is because we were holding back on aluminum, rubber, oil, all of these things that they needed to feed their war machine. So they said, okay, well, let's just attack America so we have an excuse to go ahead and take all of their supplies across the edges of their empire, of the Japanese empire. So that is part of it. And then Germany ended up invading into North Africa and the Middle East to see some of those oil fields.
Oh yeah, they were rich, definitely, at that time. Something I think is interesting is after that, in relation to Japan and Germany, the biggest thing economically that I see out of that is how expensive a standing army is.
Oh yeah,
because neither of those nations were allowed to have a military. And so they said, okay, then we will invest everything into technology and industry, and we'll see you on the other side.
Yeah.
And Germany's the wealthiest nation in Europe. It's partially because of just their view of work and efficiency, my goodness. And Japan is the same way, actually. With the Toyota innovations, just like thinking is where we get like Six Sigma, came from, Kaizen, like every day, a little bit of improvement, which I'm going off on a tangent here, but.
Well, I mean, both civilizations are known for being almost obsessed with efficiency and a heavy work ethic. So, I mean, I think you're onto something there. So, and of course, both of them are strategically placed in the world for trade and things like that. I mean, you're dead center in Europe. Everybody's got to go through you. So, I mean,
and you've got an awesome trade route in the ocean.
Right. Exactly.
Which just shows how freaking amazing America is anyway. Because we had to protect both of those groups for years and decades, and we're still the number one economic power.
Still
until not too long ago. We're not as economically free. But gee, I wonder why that is.
Because of communists. Which is why, so I want to pull on a string that we touched on here a little bit. This whole thing, well, Russia was our ally, so we don't talk about a lot of the bad things that they did. It kind of just got swept under the rug of history, right? Because they were allies of convenience, but they were our allies. And especially because of how touchy Stalin was. There was, if you look at the details of the Yalta Conference or several other conferences where the big three, Churchill, FDR, and Stalin would meet, Stalin was very, very touchy. And especially because him and Churchill did not get along, FDR was kind of the go-between there. And there's some interesting
the
stories.
irony is not lost on me.
Indeed.
With that.
Anyway, so they kind of get swept under the rug. So I think that's a very small part of the reason why it's socially acceptable to espouse socialist or communist ideas, even if you're drawing from just horrible examples like the USSR or Cuba or all of these places that Soviet Russia has touched, and the same traditions that they had of torture, of genocide, of secret police and all these other horrible things. The legacy of it.
I'm just thinking of Afghanistan.
Oh, sure.
Right now,
this is going to be another.
Well, it is. British and Russian imperialism is the whole reason that jihad even exists. That blew my mind when I figured that out.
Oh, for sure.
But just what they did to the Middle East, Russia, England, neither of them are immune to criticism. They did terrible things.
Right.
And it was, what the Brotherhood of Steel would definitely object to.
We're going to so many different directions.
We're going to do that episode eventually.
No, that's going to happen.
But yeah, just raping the land and taking the natural resources and the innovation and technology and just taking it home. And it's very much a pirate mentality.
Well, yeah, I mean, either way, one way or another, you're putting your foot on somebody else's neck. And nobody likes that. But today we see all of these. I mean, we've got professors that are teaching economics for Pete's sake. And they're saying that socialism is a viable economic system. So I think
that totally depends on whatever you mean by viable.
Well, yeah, and it ultimately comes down to values, doesn't it? What is my value system built around? So for us, it would be built around the idea that the individual has ultimate sovereignty over themselves, so they can decide what is best for themselves, how best they spend their own money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's most important to us. Now, as a secondary, we do want a system to run efficiently. And if more people are helped as a result of that, then that's wonderful. And it just so happens that in a free market capitalist system, all of those things are held into account, and all of those things work to the benefit of everyone.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, of course, you have socialism and communism, which espouse those same things minus the sovereignty of the individual. Well, everyone is going to get this, and everyone's going to have, free health care and education and all of these things, but then none of it actually pans out.
Yeah.
Which is, when we get back to what we talked about before with Sowell. Thomas Sowell says that it doesn't matter what your intentions are, the ultimate outcome is what really matters.
Now, stop me if I've already mentioned this, but I talked to, maybe I did before, talked about going to Greece and talking to people that had free college.
I don't think we've talked about it on the show. We've talked about it off air.
Okay. When was this? 2012, 2011. I went to Greece and Athens specifically and talked to the people in the university there. And I said, well, what are you studying? And they had free college. And the thing is, it was for however long you wanted to study.
Okay. Wow.
So, and take note of the date that I said because, not too long, they're bankrupt. But anyways.
Several times.
It's just amazing, the policy. Anyways.
That's amazing.
I said, what are you studying and why and what are you going to do? And it came down to, whatever they wanted, and they changed majors just as often as people in the States. So, that didn't help anything if that was one of their goals. But it was, okay, what are you going to do? Next semester's coming up. Are you going to change again? Are you going to stay the course? No, I think we're going to run a sailboat. Probably go down to Cyprus and Crete and just different islands in the Mediterranean and probably drink a lot of wine. There's like a third cousin, uncle once removed that, has a place down there. So I think we're going to take the whole semester and do that.
Okay.
And it's like, okay. So, but then you're going to, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
So that really stupid video where they film the different spiders and say that they're giving them different drugs.
Yeah.
You don't work.
Right.
If everything's handed to you. It's like Dennis Prager, what he was saying on his video. It's like if you create a dependent society where all they know is to verbally berate their enemies and then hold their hand out for the next big thing, they're not going to work.
Right.
You've socially and mentally conditioned them to just have their hand out and expect the next thing. And the same is true of Greece. You've got generation after generation. I don't know how long that policy was, but they're now conditioned to say, well, we're going to get free school and health care, and we'll root for our soccer team, and we'll drink, and we'll work maybe a little bit, but.
Well, so take that a logical step further then. So it's not just creating dependency to create dependency. Maybe it's actually, if you perform a certain way, you will be rewarded, but also keeping them dependent. So let me flesh this out a little bit.
That didn't work out too well in Russia.
Well, it hasn't worked out anywhere, which is kind of the whole point. But let's say, for example, you're already dependent on the system. Okay, so they already have control of you. Let's say you're like a was it monkeys, where it was like if they did a certain thing, then it would shock everybody, or if they did a certain thing, they would all be rewarded.
I think that was right, except they were given morphine, unless that was a different study.
We're mixing all of our analogies here at this point. Okay, so there was, I'm pretty sure it was like rhesus monkeys, where if
Rhesus.
You
almost said racist.
Racist. Rhesus. I've been drinking coffee, and this just is not working well.
It's like rhesus monkeys.
Rhesus. I need to get back to the Scotch instead, apparently.
Or crack the biology book.
Or crack the biology book. So the rhesus monkeys, and if one of them did a certain action, then they would be shocked. And so if eventually, after a certain number of times, they were conditioned, and so when one monkey started to do this thing, all the rest of them would beat the crap out of him. So
just soap and socks, though.
Oh, yeah, brutal.
Yeah.
So using that as an analogy, what if you've created dependence, so you put them all in a cage, if you will, and they're all living together. You feed them, you give them water, whatever, and then as soon as one of them steps out of line and does something that you don't like, the rest of them know that they're not going to get whatever they're now dependent on. And so they beat the crap out of that one monkey because he stepped out of line. He's doing something that, the scientists or whoever's got the strings, doesn't like. And so we've got to stop him from doing that. The Vault-Tec employee. So in the same way, why can't you do that with an entire country?
Oh, I could definitely see that being a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. So look at, what was that book we read in high school? Enemy of the State. You know what I'm talking about? Basically, the guy, so the dude in the village is blamed for something that he didn't do. I mean, this is in all kinds of stories, not just that one specifically. Mm-hmm. But so the people that are framing him, the village leadership say, yes, we have declared this person to be an enemy of the state. Yeah. And even though the rest of the villagers don't know the details of it, he hasn't been put on trial, nothing like that, they kind of get this mob mentality. And, oh, he's an enemy of the state. That means he's an enemy of us. Yeah. We've got to take this guy out, and they end up lynching him.
Well, I see two different stories that go along with that, even if it's not the same one.
Sure.
Scarlet Letter.
Yes.
And also The Crucible.
Yes. Yeah. I think this one was based in Scandinavia, coincidentally, but yeah, the same principle. It's along the same lines. So if it's, let's say, the government decides that you're an enemy of the state, and because everyone else has been dancing to their tune like rats behind the Pied Piper, they just go along with it. Oh yeah, screw that guy. He's an enemy of the state. And then you have no one in your corner.
That's what's so dangerous about just throwing terms out there.
Right.
One, actually know what it means. And then two, use it when appropriate. And that's something a friend of ours, their dad, got on to us years ago. We were really young. But it was like he kept telling us, quit saying things are awesome. Because not everything can be awesome.
Right.
And at the time,
contrary
I was like, dude,
the Lego movie.
Stop telling me what to say.
Because everything is awesome.
Right. Which, by definition, then everything's the same.
Right.
Nothing's
awesome.
Which, like I said at the time, I was like, man, don't tell me what to say. But, I say what I want is essentially where I'm going with that. But the idea is planted in my head to say, appreciate things that are great.
Yeah.
And call it what it is. But
words
actually
have
know
power.
What you're talking about.
Yeah, words have power is the point here. So if you're just throwing terms around, A, they're eventually not going to mean anything at all. But in the meantime, before you get to that point, B, that can be something that can, sticks and stones and all that. But if you whip people up into a frenzy because you use hyperbolic language, that can become very dangerous.
So you haven't said it yet, but people being word police and just throwing blanket terms out there, lazy arguments.
Of course.
You're kind of saying that this is the beginning of that rhesus monkey study.
Yeah.
The self-fulfilling prophecy to say that you're going to need to fight people who are your enemy of the state.
Right.
Because, things are going to be taken away. It's not going to be good for you.
Well, and they're already laying the groundwork for that, I guess is my point here. So they're not apologizing. They're holding up systems that are created specifically to create dependence between the government and the people. Socialism, communism, whatever. It's already seen as socially acceptable. We have politicians that are openly using this as part of their platform. They're calling themselves democratic socialists. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So that's the first step. So let's introduce this system that creates dependence. Then from there, let's actually create that dependence. Let's put that system into practice. Then from there, you can just start pointing and naming people enemy of the state. And you don't even have to say, well, he's a Nazi or he's a racist or whatever. You can just say, he doesn't like the system that's in place, i.e., he wants to take food out of your mouths, or he wants to take your health care, or he doesn't think you deserve free education. And now the government doesn't even need to do anything. Society will do it for them.
How are we doing on time? Because there's another thing that popped up in my head.
We've got about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay. So I've been following the Florida governor race.
Uh-huh.
There's a black gentleman, I think it's Andrew Gillum.
Yes.
He could be the first, black male socialist governor of Florida to be elected. Hasn't won yet, but of course, groups online are saying that he's already won, which is so ridiculous. But anyways...
everybody said Hillary was going to win. It's like 94%.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
I didn't realize the way that they view money in relation to Washington. I was listening to a podcast from The Breakfast Club, which is it's an all-black hosted morning radio show. And they were talking to him, and one of the lines is so ridiculous. I don't want to play identity politics, but you'll be the first black governor of Florida. That's a big deal. It's like, you don't want to, but you just did. Anyways, some of his points were the things I didn't realize. What he was saying is there's a lot of money that we missed out on from the federal government as a state.
Oh, gosh.
So, and I had no idea that this is how they view everything.
Yeah, of course.
Basically, all of our taxes go into a pot in Washington. And we discussed that this is the exact same that happened in ancient Rome.
Yeah.
But there are certain credits that a state can do to earn money from the Fed to support their initiatives.
Right.
Had no idea that that's the way that they view everything should be funded to a state.
Yes.
Dude, the lag time on that, the gross inefficiency.
Oh, absolutely. It's disgusting.
The I'm not done yet.
Okay.
The amount of dollars that can be lost in transition.
Yes.
What's interesting about that to me is I kept saying, yeah, this is money that, they can't have, they blah, blah, blah. How about they should never have it in the first place?
Right, exactly. But that's a foregone conclusion for them.
I know! It blew me away!
And that's what's insane.
It's ridiculous.
So, and that's another interesting point, though. Not that we have time to delve too deeply into this.
But I had no idea.
This whole blurring of lines between the federal and the state government. So obviously in the Constitution, particularly in the 10th Amendment that we talked about on the last episode, there's supposed to be a very, very clear and wide division between the federal and the state government. But this is one of the ways that they figured out how to work around it. So let's collect federal income taxes. We're going to take all of this money from the people, and they can't say crap about it.
Right.
So we're going to take all of that from them, and then we'll sprinkle it across all of the states, depending on what they need. State grants, block grants.
That's not what it is. It's not what they... That's your point, too.
Right.
It's not what they need.
Right.
It's exactly what happened in Russia. How close are you in a relationship status to the higher-ups in Washington? That directly relates to what you're going to make as a Soviet bloc, as a Soviet group.
Yes.
It's the exact same.
How much can you do for me? And I'll do something for you. That's just the way the world works. But that's not an excuse for that being the way our government operates. So we need to have accountability as individuals the government needs to have accountability because we are holding them accountable.
Yeah.
So we need to call BS on that kind of stuff. So exactly like you did when you were listening to that podcast, you were like, whoa, wait a second. Why isn't everyone thinking that way? Because we're already puppets dancing on the strings. Oh,
it's just how it is.
Yeah.
It's worked this way for so long.
Nothing we can do about it. And then that slowly morphs into, well, that's just how it is, like you said, or that's just how it needs to be. I've had people tell me that, well, we need a little bit of socialism. We're edging into that kind of territory now. And obviously some states are moving towards it a lot quicker than others, like California or a lot of northeastern states. We've
already talked about this, but the whole reason Florida's a big deal is because they think that swing states are historically the only ones that are ever going to go one or the other, and that there's going to be no difference of voting record of states that are historically right or left of the aisle. They change. That's the whole point.
Well, I mean, look at the 2016 election.
Yes.
You had all of these states that were traditionally blue, and they turned red. But they want to boil it down into the simplest terms possible, especially
for wipe out the Electoral College,
especially for
straight democracy. Let's all vote for free college, 4-year. Let's all have a bachelor's. And the thing that I've said before, if we all have a bachelor's, then it doesn't matter.
If everything's awesome, then nothing is awesome. Nothing is awesome.
So now we all have a bachelor's. Mm-hmm. We all have Medicare for all, health care. Mm-hmm. So that means that historically, as we've seen in Canada, and even in the States and the UK, people will go to the hospital for reasons why they shouldn't even go to the freaking hospital. Mm. You've got a head cold, drink some water, take some Advil, simmer down.
Right.
Reduce your stress and eat better. Okay, people are spending the insurance money. It's not insurance anymore. It's taxes. Mm-hmm. So now quality of healthcare goes in the crapper. Mm-hmm. Let's see what else is garbage. Social Security will be completely drained because they're
that's going to happen.
Reallocate it. Oh yeah, and you want to know why? Because President Clinton dipped into Social Security to balance the budget to reduce the deficit.
Yep.
Which just meant not incurring more debt.
Correct.
It didn't help anything.
Well, let's just raise the debt ceiling, dude. It's not a big deal. It's just numbers anyway.
Well, MMT.
Magical money theory.
I have not read or seen that.
I think we floated that meme on the page. It was like a unicorn. No, Sarcasm and Liberty.
Oh, yeah.
There's a unicorn, and I think Bernie Sanders has the flag.
Wow.
There's another one with Obama Cortez, and she's like holding a sign. Why do politicians have pictures where they're holding signs on social media now? Because somebody's just going to white it out and then put whatever they want on there. It's just not smart. Anyway,
Trump with this is a snack.
Gosh, I mean, it's so funny though. I mean, I'm glad they do it, but just from a PR perspective, it's probably not super smart. But yeah, so Sarcasm and Liberty had Obama Cortez with a unicorn, and it said magical money theory. Anyway,
it's all just cloth. It's all just paper cloth money.
Right? Yeah, it's not real
ones
anyway.
And zeros too.
Anyway, so let's wrap this up. Let's bring it all in.
Sorry.
So overall,
it's just so freaking frustrating.
Oh, of course it's frustrating, and that's why, again, like almost every call to action we have across the wide array of all of our programs is just get involved, just become more informed, and then from the information that you gather, make informed decisions, form informed opinions, and then act on them. instead of just saying, well, this is just how it is, or it's always been this way, or I can't do anything about it. Yes, you can. But
it's
you
a
have
secret ballot for a reason.
Right. Or who cares if it's secret or not, man? I mean, I get it. A lot of people are professionals.
No, I'm saying when you come to the 99-yard line and you're about to score the touchdown on voting day, no one knows what you did.
Oh, sure. But it's going to take more than that, though. We're too far.
You need to inform and have discussions with other people.
Yeah. Well, just activism in general. I mean, even if you can't get your face out there, if all you can do is vote, then absolutely vote. Yeah. But if you can afford to do more, then you have to do more. It's not enough to just say, well, somebody else will take care of it. We can't do that anymore. We're way too far gone. So we need to start rolling that back, but we can only do it by people getting involved. So we talked about Nazism and socialism and communism and the modern left and how they're really all the same except for that racial component. And even that could be argued with the whole, let's not say that it's oppressing certain groups based on race. Let's say instead that they're all obsessed with identity in one form or another. I think that's a fair assessment across the board. So even then, just checking those boxes all the way down the line. But for some reason, and I can't personally nail it down, much less in this show, for some reason, socialism and communism is still socially acceptable. It's okay to openly say that you're a socialist or you're a communist without somebody saying, yeah, you're probably just economically illiterate, you know. And more to the point, you've got politicians that espouse these views that have huge followings behind them. So it's still not okay to be a socialist or a communist is what I'm getting at here. And we're just both immensely frustrated at this point.
Yeah. Well, I'm not even going to go into it. But the overarching theme of what I was going to go into is it's very easy to listen to the new fad, whether it be a Brown University study about gender, which I'm not going to go into.
Another time.
Or democratic socialism, or Medicare for all. It's real easy to just hear the next thing that you're supposed to be passionate about and feign passion, feign intelligence, and diminish ideas of which you don't even know your own ideas, but you know when you hear whatever the opposition is and their standpoint, just shoot them down. Just do whatever it takes. You know, have a consistent message of negativity. I don't think any of them are happy. I don't think,
for sure.
What do they want to do?
Stop everybody else from whatever it is they're doing.
And then we're all on the same side, and then what?
Now we're all miserable.
I mean, are there wars inside religious communities, regardless of race and ethnicity? Yes, there are. Well, why? They're all supposed to conform to the same thing anyway.
Right. That's a tangent, but I see where you're going with it.
They still don't get along, and nothing's hunky-dory.
Right. There's no utopia. There's no perfect system. It's just a question of how close we can get to being perfect. Perfect. So then you get into the metric of it. So how do you measure what is perfect or what is good? So in an abstract
according
sense,
to them, it's the majority, which is staggering.
Right. So, well, not necessarily. I mean, if you look at something like Marxism, so everyone is equal, everyone has all of these things that they need to live, the standard of living is high, this very utopian fantasy. So we can already take that off the table because we've established that perfection is not going to happen. But if your metric is that everyone has all of these things and everyone is living a good life and we're moving forward and progressing and bettering the standard of living, the closest we have ever gotten to having that across the board and universal is through free market capitalism.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you don't say that.
Period. Dot. That is a statistical fact.
Right.
So, but we still have these people that want to reach for this utopian idea, regardless of how many times it's failed.
Well, let's give them the freedom to do that somewhere.
On their own.
Yeah.
Apart from us.
Right.
But it doesn't work without force. And that's where we come into play here. So, just for the sheer fact that we can't end this episode on a down note, I want to encourage everybody out there that's watching us to, as Tom said, go talk to people, have these conversations, challenge their ideas. Don't be a dick. Don't be negative just for the sake of being negative, but question everything. So if they say, yeah, I think democratic socialism is great. Why? Why do you think that's great? What is your empirical evidence for it? What can you show me statistics where this has been successful over the long run? What is your metric for success? Question. Challenge. And maybe a handful of times you'll change that person's mind, or you will at least make them question their own ideas or their own ideology. And through that kind of action, we can roll back this tide of authoritarianism, this wave of popularity behind authoritarian, totalitarian systems like socialism, like communism, in all of its different forms, because it always comes down to the same thing. It comes down to authoritarianism. It comes down to collectivism. It always requires force. So before we need to respond with force, let's respond with countering ideas. Let's respond with statistical evidence, with empirical evidence, with historical evidence. Let's show them why they are wrong and turn that tide, turn it the other way. You have any closing comments, Tom?
Yeah, feelings are not a good measuring stick for why you should make decisions. It might feel good to have a little white lie, or to freebase cocaine, or have that next drink if you're an addict. Feelings, it's not a good measurement of a good decision. So take a step back. There's definitely wisdom in many counselors. We're two people. There's also historical and scientific evidence. And definitely some people want to retract their studies. And I'm sorry, I said I wasn't going to get into that.
We'll talk off air and maybe do it on another episode.
But do something. Do something great. Because we both believe in you, and we believe in this country and what we can accomplish.
But we have to become active in order to get there.
That's true.
So, become informed, become active. I think that's the gist of this episode. So, counter the Red Revolution, better dead than red. I guess that's it, man. So, check out the rest of our content on think-liberty.com. Of course, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Gab. We're across all of the social media platforms, wherever your preference is. We've got our podcasts across Spotify, iTunes. What's the new? We just added a new program that basically puts I think
it's Spreaker.
Spreaker, yeah. It uploads
everything out.
So we're on YouTube now, obviously, not just our videos, but all of the podcasts are also on YouTube. So if you're watching us on the Think Liberty channel, you can also check out all of the audio-only podcasts through YouTube as well. As I said, Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, all the rest of them. And, of course, we'll be continuing to make videos on here. And, shoot, man, I guess just continue tuning in to become more liberty-centered with us.